So we're going to get started. Again, my name is David Sanders. I am General Counsel for the Greater Las Vegas Association of Realtors. Today we're going to be talking about the changes to a series of forms that will go live mostly on October 1st with a handful of issues that have gone live on July 1st and September 1st. So these are the following forms we're going to be talking about. The Residential Purchase Agreement, the Contingent Upon Sale Addendum, which is a new document, the Seller's Multiple Counteroffer, the Request for Repairs, Pre- and Post-Occupancy Addendums, those are new documents, the Vacant Land Purchase Agreement, and the Financing Addendum. In addition to that, we will be talking about the changes to the Listing Agreement that went live on September 1st. And because we don't have enough to talk about, we'll also talk about some property management issues, the Residential Lease Agreement, and what was known as AB 161, which went through the legislature. So the first thing we're going to talk about in the RPA is the concept of date calculation. This is mostly for your contingencies. So as it is today, and it will be until October 1st, the definition of acceptance is defined as the date that the parties get all the documents and they receive them, okay? So currently, you have two different ways that you have to calculate dates. You have that way, and then you have the way for the CIC package that starts to count the day after the CIC package is accepted. So as of today, if the parties agree and all the documents are transferred and received by all the parties, today is day one. Be it 11:30 in the morning or 11:59 p.m. at night, this is your first day of your loan contingency, of your appraisal contingency, and of your due diligence period. So rather than making it difficult for you guys to have two ways to calculate, we have adopted the language straight from NRS 116-4109. So now, if you'll notice in your RPA, if you want to turn to 2B or 2C, you'll notice that the phrase following the date of acceptance of the RPA has been inserted after the number of calendar days you pick for that contingency, okay? So now there's only one way to calculate dates in the RPA, be it the CIC package, the loan contingency, the appraisal contingency, or your due diligence, okay? So it resolves that concern about when do those periods start. So as of October 1st, say new RPA is used, you have, everybody agrees and accepts, all the documents are received on October 1st, due diligence starts October 2nd, okay? Is that, you have any questions on that? Okay, so one thing to keep in mind today as we go through all of these forms, there's a lot of forms on that list. Don't get intimidated. The scope of changes this year are not nearly as extensive as last year's changes. So there's lots of little changes in lots of different forms rather than the deep dive we did last year with the RPA, okay? So take a deep breath, breathe through your nose, everything's gonna be okay. So that's date calculation. So it's impacted sections 2B, 2C, and section 7. Any questions on that? So your appraisal contingency, your loan contingency, and your due diligence period. Okay? Guess what? That's the biggest change to the RPA. Okay? Deep breath. So, let's talk about section 3, which is a change but not as big. So section 3 is contingent upon sale. As your market is increasing and becoming much more healthy, the idea of I want to upgrade to a new house, so I want to sell my existing one, is becoming an issue that's come back. The existing language in section 3 is problematic. So, what we've done, and if you look at your RPA, and then we'll jump to the standalone form, if you go to section 3 of the RPA, it is now a yes or no. Is this property contingent upon the sale of another? If it is, you mark the checkbox, and then you're going to pull the contingent upon sale addendum. It is a single page, okay? Are you with me so far? So section 3, you mark it, it's akin to the short sale addendum, okay? So, let's go through what this document has. So it's going to require you to to provide some information about the status of the property. For example, buyer's property is or is not in escrow. It's not listed for sale. If it is listed for sale, what MLS is it listed in? Give us the MLS number. How many days do they have to enter into escrow? If it is an escrow, then ask for escrow information. So all the information that you used to ask in the RPA is now in the standalone document, okay? There's opportunities for the buyer to cancel the transaction if they can't secure a buyer for the buyer's other property. There's an opportunity for the seller to cancel if the buyer fails to provide evidence that the property is in escrow. And it also requires notice, the buyer to notify the seller if there's any problems or if the other sale falls out of escrow. Okay, the key for you guys is the last bullet point. If the RPA is not canceled by a specific date, you guys select in the contingent upon sale addendum, the buyer is deemed to have waived the contingency and move on, okay? So it's not a whole lot of major changes. It's basically all the information that you had in your existing section 3, streamlined, cleaned up, and put on its own document so that if you need it, it's standalone. If you don't, it's not there at all. Any questions about this? Yes, sir.
I am assuming that in C, small I, where it says is listed for sale with brokerage and listed in, that's where you put it, if it's an out-of-state one?
Yes.
Put the information in
You would
right
just
there.
put that information right there. Okay. Any other questions?
Hold it close.
When does the contingent on sale addendum go into effect? Is that October 1st or September?
Okay, so all the new forms that we're talking about today go into effect on October 1st. So we have all of our forms go live on either April 1st or October 1st. One, so that the brokers don't come down here and strangle us all. And two, because when our good friends in Carson City decide to change Nevada law, that all goes into effect on October 1st. So since we have to make some time changes, so all of these changes go live on October 1st.
The listing agreement is already in transaction.
Yes, the listing agreement, as we said, right here, is that the listing agreements went live on September 1st, okay? So when we get to the listing agreement, we'll talk about those changes. Yes, sir?
Without reading this, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is there any provision in this addendum for leaving the house on the market during this contingency?
So-
With release clauses?
So the contingency language we took the exact same language that you have in your existing RPA and spun it off into a different form and clarified it. So there is the ability, if the seller wishes to, so to answer your question is, that language didn't exist in your old RPA, it's not in this contingency.
I wrote it in.
I'm sorry?
So I would write it. Was it in the old one?
Yeah, you could write that in if you wanted to.
Okay.
And just attach it as an addendum, if that's how you want to go.
Thank you.
Okay? Any questions about that? Okay, so far, we've got date calculations, we've got to do a contingent upon sale form. Yes, sir.
We can write in anything we want in this contract. We can put in there that we require the property to remain on the market for the contingency period, can't we?
Well, to the certain extent that, caution you to be careful about practicing law without a license, you certainly can put language into a document if that's what the seller requires you to do so. Our forms are designed to be a resource for the membership. If that's the business model you want to go down, that's certainly something you could do if the seller and you reach that agreement and the buyer is willing to agree to that. You could certainly do that.
We have to put a contingency or on the MLS sheet.
For the purposes of today's discussion, we're just going to talk about the forms, how the MLS is going to handle this. That's a separate issue. So let's limit our questions just to the forms themselves today, okay? All right. Any other questions?
I just want to make sure I'm clear that all the dates start the day after acceptance. Day one is the day after acceptance.
Okay, so let's go back to date calculation. So date calculation is, so we define the word acceptance. Now here's a little tip. In a contract, anytime you see a word that is capitalized, buyer, seller, in this case acceptance, that is a defined term in the contract, okay? So we define acceptance, section 23 of the RPA, is the date by which all parties receive and execute and receive all the documents. So it's not just the day that I sign the RPA if I'm the buyer, It's the day that I get the executed documents back from the seller. So as of October 1st, dates will be calculated the following day after that defined term acceptance. Okay? That's a good question. So what you're repeating.
Would you say that acceptance would actually be the date that the agent representing the buyer or the seller receives it? Because, you know, when they get it to the buyer or seller, who knows?
So the way the word acceptance, so did everybody hear his question? Is acceptance just the day that the agents get the documents? The way we define acceptance is it's the day that the buyer and the seller both get that. So if you're an agent, you want to make sure that you're forwarding that to your clients. Because if you sit on it, say for 3 days, all I've really done is extend the due diligence period. So it's the date by which the buyer and the seller get everything. So if I'm an agent, I want to make sure that I'm doing that. I'm making sure that I'm getting a read, receipt, or proof of that. But that was changed last year in last year's RPA. So that's been the way it has been for about a year.
Did we create a form in which we report to one another the date that the buyer and seller receive?
We don't have a specific form like that. That could be done by email communication.
Okay, and so we cannot assume. We must email, communicate with one another about the actual day we have delivered documents to our clients, or would a judge look in default as the last date of the last signature?
So this is a very good question. So because of the way we've defined acceptance, you would want some kind of documentation that you took the affirmative step to send it to your clients. And whatever evidence that would be. Email would be more than sufficient in that scenario. The judge probably would want to make sure that the actual parties to the contract, the buyer and the seller, receive the documents before they go.
And how does the agent on the other side become aware that that has been?
Well, so the question is how does the agent on the other side become aware of that? The agents would need to communicate that this is the day that everything's been accepted and sent over. That's a statutory obligation under NRS 645 to be able to communicate that type of information. So that should be happening already. Yes.
That's my piggyback to her question. We should be doing that, but we all know there's many who don't.
Okay.
And this moment they get it signed, good luck getting some more communication.
Well, so the timeframes are established in the document either way. We've decided to make it calculating easier so the first date of acceptance doesn't necessarily address the issue going through the road. There's really no way that I, myself or the Forms Committee, could create a form that's going to force realtors or real estate professionals who don't want to follow the rules, don't want to be ethical, to do that. So this is the document that's been approved by the Board of Directors, and this is the date calculation.
But those are the agents that will work it down the road, that if it gets sticky and their buyer wants to cancel and it's 2 days after due diligence, well, they didn't get it.
So let's take a step back and figure this out, because we walked through this analysis of why this is. And by the way, this definition of acceptance was in the RPA last year. So this has been the definition of your document for almost a year now. So let's take a walk through. If I'm a seller and I fail to communicate to my client that the offer has been accepted, and then later on down the road I want to argue the due diligence period should be extended, delayed, or extended, what have I just given you written documentation of? My intentional violation of NRS 645 and the Code of Ethics. So the only way that you really have the scenario you're talking about is the other side is giving you actual written documentation that they've intentionally violated their statutory and ethical obligations. So it's not going to benefit a party in that sense, because there are repercussions for failing to timely provide those documents. It's not going to hurt the buyer or the seller. It's the agent who didn't do it that's going to have the problem. Because if I am, let's say I'm the seller, and the buyer's agent went down this road, then it's not exactly like there's going to be a way for them to get out of that. It's defined intentionally that way. I don't have the ability to change the definition of the word acceptance. It's not part of the updates. As much as I would love to continue a discussion on this subject, I would like to kind of focus in primarily on the changes to the form this year. If this is an issue that's a real issue in the field, please communicate that to the Forms Committee so we can address that perhaps next year. Are there any more questions about the changes to date calculation or Section 3? If there's not, we'll move on. Yes, ma'am.
My only comment is that
in the first page of the RPA, A says, within 1 day from acceptance about the earnest money. So, to me, it's all a moot point because they're gonna deposit the money and that's gonna show that they
Okay,
realize
so-
that they were accepted, so it's
So
like.
let's talk about this because this is a common misconception. Is earnest money required for a valid contract? No. Is earnest money acceptance the date by which you calculate your timeframes for due diligence, the appraisal contingency, or the loan contingency? No. So that's a separate issue. You're absolutely right that the statute, Nevada statute requires it to be 1 business day or something that the parties have agreed. But to the extent that that language is not really controlling over how you calculate your loan contingency, for example. But you're absolutely right that there's that language of 1 business day. Okay? Any other questions? You've been very patient. Please wait for a mic.
I would like to know.
Ma'am, please, can you wait for a microphone? Thank you.
I'm a firm believer that hopefully the agents that do not adhere to this will be aware of what the violation, monetary violation is. What is it?
Well, there's not really so to the extent, I can't answer your question, and here's why. Because I can't speak for the real estate division who may decide to sanction agents for violating their code of ethics, their violations under NRS 645. What I can tell you is that if I sue you, I'm gonna ask for punitive damages, attorney's fees, interest, and my attorney charges $2,000 an hour. So there's a substantial amount that's at risk here. There's a potential you could lose your license, all those kinds of things. So I can't answer your question. I don't want to avoid it. It's just that I can't as the GOER's lawyer. Okay. Let's talk about section 7A. Does anybody know what this picture is? It's the Badlands, right? Okay, so, golf courses. Golf courses have recently come into the news a lot with them attempting to redevelop. This is not an issue primarily for Southern Nevada either. It's an issue all over the country. In fact, the Clark County Commission met yesterday to talk about, not the Clark County Commission, the City of Las Vegas met yesterday to try to come up with some kind of regulations on how to address when people want to develop golf courses and what those rights are. Part of the reason why this is a complex issue is, and I hate to give you the lawyer answer, it depends, but it depends on the golf course involved. For example, Silverstone, up in the northern part of the valley, there is a right under the CCNRs for a golf course to be built. So probably the homeowners there are going to be successful. Badlands, probably not so much, because they were told in their documents that this could be developed. Legacy out in Henderson is a little different because there was a deed restriction of 50 years. So rather than creating a golf course notification addendum or a golf course document, took a step back and figured out what does due diligence do. So we added the red section under 7A. Just like you would talk about airports, flood zones, noxious fumes, odors, and you tell the buyer it is their obligation, if there's anything that's surrounding or affecting the property, do an investigation. Now, Silverstone, that's going to show up in the CIC package. Legacy, it's a deed restriction, so it's going to be on title. Badlands, same thing. So this is enough to address the issue to protect you guys as realtors from a potential lawsuit 2 to 3 years down the road if they decide to develop a golf course to collide with the property. There's really nothing between this and airport noise, anything else along those lines. So that's the update for golf courses.
There are several other golf courses that are going to be closed in the near future. If you sold a property today, what do you have to tell the buyer?
Well, so again, to go back to this section, it's going to depend on the property. It's going to depend on the golf course. It's not like I can give you a specific answer because it's going to depend. Again, like Legacy out in Henderson is a deed restriction. that the city is the only one who can really enforce. The neighbors probably don't have a really strong case. Silverstone is an HOA issue, so the HOA and the homeowners can bring a lawsuit, and they've been more successful. Badlands is a hybrid, and the problem is because of the way golf courses are established. If they're built as a country club, or built as part of the development, or if they're freestanding, they're all going to have a different standard of review. So the short answer is it's going to depend on the golf course, which is why we're putting it here. So that if it's a HOA related one, it'll be in the CIC documents. If it's a deed restriction, it's going to be on title. So there's 3 or 4 different places it's going to be depending on which golf course it is. That being said, the city of Las Vegas is looking at changing this entire process and may have some legal restrictions on development moving forward. So we put this in here knowing that this is an issue that government is going to address. And if government addresses it, has specific regulations, we'll have to address that down the road.
So if I sell one that's on a potential golf course closing, I don't have to disclose anything.
Well, let's take a step back. If you're the seller's agent, you're disclosing, if it's in the HOA, you're disclosing it in the CIC package. If it's a deed restriction, it's a public record and there's no duty to disclose it because it's a public record. So most of those things, I'm not sure what duty you would have under that scenario as an agent. The seller would have the obligation to disclose that, but most of those things are records that the buyer gets during the transaction.
Well, I know they've been negotiating for about 2 years on whether it's going to close or not, but I just want to make sure I don't get stuck with a lawsuit.
Well, as long as the seller is producing the CIC package and you're looking at title, it's going to be there. I can't give you a yes/no answer of how to protect yourself with this because it's going to depend on the golf course. It's going to depend on like 5 or 6 different things. So the obligation for the buyer to determine whether or not the property is sufficient for their use, we put it in here. Just like if I don't want to buy a property in a flood zone, I don't want to be too close to the airport. It's the same type of thing from the legal scenario as it is with the existence of the local golf course. Okay? All right. Stay tuned on this because this is an issue facing not just Clark County, but nationwide. So, section 10. This is the CIC package. This went live on July 1st because our good friends in Carson City changed the statute and it went live on July 1st. So let's talk about this. Prior to July 1st, if you were the buyer, you represented a buyer, and I got the CIC package, and I wanted to cancel the RPA within my 5-day window, how would I have to do that? Hand delivery or US mail. If you emailed it to me, you might as well call your E&O insurance. Okay? So, they changed the statute and they added the language in red. And that's straight from the statute, electronic transmission. So section 10 and section 24, which is our notice, delivery, and signature section, has also been updated to reflect that. So what does that mean for you? It means that if I'm your buyer and I'm coming to you and I want to cancel the CIC package, you can send it to me via fax, or you can send it to the seller via fax, you can send it to him via email, you can hand deliver it, or you can also do US mail. Those are your 4 options by which to serve that. Now, the problem that comes with this is a significant bone of contention. And if you blow that 5th day, it's on you. So, I would recommend, I'm going to go old school on this. I'd recommend you fax it. Because then you get a fax cover sheet that verifies that you sent it within the 5-day window. If you're going to email it, which you can, you better make sure you get some kind of delivery and read receipt, because that's going to be the issue. You didn't give it to me within the 5-day window, and it is the buyer and the buyer's agent obligation to have that proof. Yes, ma'am.
Can it be postmarked on the 5th day?
Yes.
So, and that counts as
Yes.
5 days, so we
US
don't have
mail.
the 3-day delivery
Yes.
issue.
So the question with this is, so you work with lots of lawyers. 3 days for mail. Okay, so her question was, if I'm going to send it by US mail, does it have to be postmarked within the 5 days, or do I get an extra 3 days? The reason why she asked that is she deals with lawyers, and our rules for civil procedure give us an extra 3 days if it's delivered by mail. So that's a number you don't need to worry about. So yes, you can mail it, and as long as it is postmarked by the U.S. Postal Service by the 5th day, you're fine. So after hours, which post office is still open? The one by the airport, okay? So it's not as big of an issue before. So again, I don't care what process you decide to communicate with them. email, fax, US mail, hand delivery. The key is making sure that you have proof that you delivered it within that 5-day window. If you can't do that, I'm gonna sue you as the agent for screwing that up, okay? Any questions about that? Again, this went live on July 1st. Okay, let's talk about, okay. Any questions about the updates to the RPA? Because we're done with all the changes to the residential purchase. Okay? We have a lot more forms to go through, but we're gonna move on now. So, next one is the request for repairs. The request for repairs, the update is pretty simple. It used to be 3 pages. We got some feedback from members who said we don't like that it's 3 pages, we don't like that there's a standalone addendum document. Can't you just increase the space under the buyer's notice and the seller's response to give me some few extra lines to cut it down to 2 pages? Believe it or not, we actually listened. We made the changes that you guys requested. That's all the change to the request for repair. Okay? Seller's multiple counter offer. This form has been updated. So let's go through the updates. The first thing is the first paragraph. It now tells to the buyers, seller is making multiple counter offers. The terms may or may not be the same. Okay? And then it walks through that the counter is not binding until it's delivered pursuant to section 24 of the RPA, and all parties have accepted it, which is defined in this document as final acceptance. Okay? Only after that do the terms become binding. So until that final acceptance, parties are told seller can sell it to somebody else, buyer can cancel their offer until we get that final acceptance. Number two is important, and we'll walk through it in just a minute why. So the form clarifies in the second under number 2 that, look, we're only making changes to the purchase agreement as we identify in section 3. Meaning, and this really comes up with the mediation provision. If your client is a slimy lawyer like me, they may or may not agree to the mediation provision. So, you don't have me initial that, correct? So oftentimes, when you're the other side, when you get back the mediation provision, it's not initial. So one of the things you should probably be doing is reaching out to the other side and saying that that is an error, oops, or that's an intentional thing. So that your client can decide whether or not they want to forego their right to mediation, knowing that if anything goes wrong in this transaction, they're going to go straight to the courthouse. So section 2 is identified and says, look, unless we say in this document we're changing anything, we meant it that way. Meaning that if I did initial mediation provision in the underlying RPA, and I don't clarify it in the counteroffer, we meant to do that. Okay? So any other term that we don't change in the multiple counteroffer is in the RPA, and we meant to do that. Okay? Section 3 is where you write out what your other terms are. Section 4, check if applicable. This is the section where seller can request that all the buyers submit their highest and best offer. The reason why this was added is who has the ability to request in the scenario where there are multiple offers that the buyer give me, I'm the seller, their highest and best offers? The seller, okay? Up until this point, did we have a document that could identify that it was the seller who was asking, not the agent? Had a scenario where in a professional standards case, and I go to a lot of the professional standards cases here in town, I get to see those. We had a scenario where an agent was put in the MLS, highest and best offers, multiple offers received, send your highest and best. And the agent rules. One of the panel members asked the agent, how many other offers did you get? The agent said, I didn't get any, that's just marketing. So, to alleviate marketing, this was added into the form. Okay? It also protects you. If the seller down the road says, I never told you to do that, you're outside the scope of NRS 645, I'm going to call Jan Hawley. Nope, you told me to do it, here's your signature right away. Okay? Any other questions about this one? Okay? You might get done before 5 o'clock. Okay. residential purchase timeline. Okay? The timeline, again, is not really a document that you send over to the buyer or the seller. This is a form that you can use internally if you want to. It's just, if this is your file for ABC Street, you can take the timeline, you can staple it to the front of your file, and you can figure out all your dates, and then you can figure out what they were done so that you don't run afoul of all of your data, okay? You don't have to use it if you don't want to. It's been updated to reflect the changes in the RPA to address date calculation, and that you can cancel the CIC package, related to the CIC package of electronic transmission. That's it. Okay? Any questions about that? Vacant land purchase agreement. We are not going to spend a lot of time talking about the vacant land purchase agreement, but I do want to say we owe thanks to some really dedicated realtors who specialize in vacant land. They worked with us, they came in, they put a lot of effort into this form and into the financing addendum. This is not really an update. This is more like a massive revision. So the vacant land agreement was updated to reflect the current RPA, the changes in certain sections, due dates, timelines, etc. Most people who sell vacant land kind of specialize in that, particularly if you've got Article 11 of the Code of Ethics. So we're not going to go through every change to the vacant land purchase agreement, mostly because I think I put you all to sleep. But if you sell vacant land, if you specialize in this, you really should do yourself the favor to go through the vacant land agreement. Here's the best way to do it. Pull the most recent version of the RPA, pull the most recent version of the vacant land, and look at what's different. We pulled language out of the vacant land agreement that used to say that you had to provide the vacant land in broom-swept condition on the day of close of escrow, which seemed pretty difficult to do. It talks about inspecting the swimming pools in your vacant land, which again, may be difficult to do. So any provision that doesn't apply to a transaction involving vacant land, some of the financing requirements that are in the RPA, the financing options that are in the RPA, are not available for vacant land. Those types of things. So it's been streamlined and focused really on vacant land. And since that's not something, those vacant land transactions are not really driving our market right now, this is a document that we can provide for your use, but for the purposes of today, because we have a lot of other things to get through, we're not going to spend a lot of time doing it. But if you sell vacant land, you get vacant land listings. If you're in the outlying areas of Clark County, Nye County, or out in Mesquite, take a look at it, spend a few minutes. The best way, again, to look at the difference is just to do a compare and see what's missing. Okay? Let's talk about the financing addendum. Financing addendum is a part of the update form for vacant land agreement, has been updated to be able to use in any transaction where seller financing is a possibility. There is significant risk of potential liability when that is directly involved with seller financing. Okay? If you get into a scenario where the seller wants to finance, you really need to recommend that they go seek independent legal counsel and that make sure that you speak to your broker. There are lots of pitfalls here. Does anybody know when the Truth in Lending Act applies to the number of loans you do every year? Okay. I do because I've litigated over this. Does anybody know when RESPA applies to a seller financing scenario? I do. So the point is there are scenarios that certain lender requirements may or may not apply depending on the number of loans the seller does. And it depends, because it's the federal government, they like to make it confusing, on which law you're talking about. That doesn't include any of the issues that come up with Dodd-Frank, or how do you make sure that the people are going to make payments and all that kind of fun stuff. So we created a financing addendum that addresses a lot of these concerns, but you really need to make sure so that you don't get sued, that you're telling your seller if they want to seller finance, they need to go talk to an attorney and make sure that they understand what they're getting themselves into. Okay? Any questions? Sherry, did you have your hand? Did you?
Oh, no.
Question?
I
You knew the answer.
I've been through it personally, so I know all that. It's not
Okay.
just
Yeah, so it's a tough thing. And the last thing you want to be doing as an agent is having that email where I say, oh, I think seller financing is a good idea. Because then they turn around and sue you. Yes.
Does the board have a list of
No.
that they recommend?
The question is does the board have a list of attorneys that we recommend? And we don't. So there's a couple ways you can find real estate attorneys. One, always go talk to your broker. They will have those types of relationships. Two, the State Bar of Nevada offers a lawyer referral service. So if you go to the State Bar, you can call them and ask for, I need an attorney who specializes in seller financing. Those are the two primary ways, but we don't have like a list, like membership, for example. Okay? Okay, let's talk about pre and post possession. There are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of risks that are involved in the concept of pre and post possession that can place you as a realtor in significant legal jeopardy. Clients who wish to enter into such an agreement really need to speak to an attorney. They need to talk to their insurance experts. There may be tax consequences, and there may be accounting issues that arise just from the idea of entering into a pre and post possession agreement. There are many states that don't even offer the form because it's so inherently risky, they've decided against it. For example, when we talk about pre-possession agreements run into a massive, massive roadblock known as Nevada Revised Statute 118A, which is the landlord-tenant statute. Okay? So, I get this all the time. Well, it's really easy, Dave. We'll just contract around it. We'll say that NRS 118A doesn't apply. So, if that was true, I would tell the Nevada Highway Patrol that there is a window envelope around my car where the speed limit is 118 miles an hour, wherever I am. Just trust me, they don't think it's funny, and you'll get a ticket. So, you cannot contract out of statutory obligations. So all of the landlord-tenant requirements, if you call it a lease or an agreement to occupy, they will say NRS 118 applies. For example, NRS 118A requires that the landlord, and in pre-possession, the landlord is the seller, maintain the property in a habitable condition. Okay? Even if they've moved out. And you can't contract around that. So, here's the solution. You should opt out of creating a lease agreement. If you're going to have a pre-possession, you're making it a condition of the sale of the property, which is why these two documents are called addendums to the RPA. So that you go in, if there are issues, the other side tries to argue that this is a lease agreement. No, 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 this is a condition of sale, because NRS 118A only applies to lease agreements. Okay? So, let's go through, read these small words, and some of the things that you should be asking about if you really want to go down the road of a pre-possession agreement. Insurance. Who's responsible for damage? Seller's homeowner's insurance? Should the buyer have a tenant insurance policy? Will having a tenant in the property violate the seller's homeowner's insurance? Walkthrough. Did the parties agree to the condition of the property prior to pre-possession? What if the buyer claims the property is not in substantially the same condition? Who's going to repair that? Occupancy rights. Who gets to stay there? They get pets, and they smoke. Our lease agreements refer to the phrase smoking. So I don't care if it's tobacco, I don't care if it's marijuana, I don't care if it's rolled up old carpet. No smoking means no smoking, okay? So, those are questions. Rental payments. How much is going to be charged? Who will pay the utilities? The RPA says the seller has to maintain the utilities through the close of escrow. If the buyer moves in pre-possession, I'm cranking the AC down to 68. Who's in charge of that? Security deposit. Will there be another deposit in case the sale falls through and the property is in danger? What about buyer contingencies? If there's still some buyer contingencies and they haven't been met prior to pre-possession, what happens? What happens if the buyer decides they want to go in and start demoing the interior of the property before the close of escrow? And most importantly, the last one, What happens if the sale is not complete? I got a phone call from an agent a few years back, and they weren't there. And he walked me through this sob story. So my buyers, coming from out of state, needed a place to stay. So we asked the seller if we could have pre-possession. Seller said no. So I really felt bad for my clients, so I gave them the key out of the lockbox. No, it gets better. So they moved in. They cannot qualify for a loan anymore, and they are refusing to leave. So this was his question. Should I tell my broker about this? So, all scenarios that you guys can get into a lot of trouble about and need to be addressed in a pre-possession agreement if you're even willing to go down that road. Let's talk about post-possession. Post-possession. Now, post-possession, most of the obligations, not most, all of the obligations under the residential purchase agreement have been resolved. The best way to address a post-possession is rhymes with lease, right? NRS 118 can apply because it's a lease agreement, right? We also, or a post-possession agreement. So to determine which document is appropriate, you want to take a look at how long they're going to be there. If it's 6 months, you probably want to go with a lease agreement. If it's 2 to 3 days, maybe you could do some kind of post-possession document. Either way, we have questions just like we did for the pre-possession, where we walk through here. So, they're going to sound pretty familiar. Insurance. Who is going to have insurance on the property? Buyer should now have homeowner's insurance. Seller should get a tenant policy. Property condition. Condition of property really needs to be documented before the seller pays and stays open. They might also want to consider having a home warranty. Term. How long is the tenancy going to be? If they need to stay longer, will there be a contingency or a way to address that in the document? Security deposit. This is a big one. NRS 118A requires by state law that it can't exceed more than 3 months periodic rent. So I can't say to the buyer, can't say to the seller, all right, you can stay, but I want $1.5 million as your lease as a deposit. Because NRS 118 actually has a language in it that says intentional attempts to do an end run around this, we're going to go after the person who did it. It's really designed to not really give you a lot of wiggle room. Now, NRS 118, unless you're a property manager, you'll deal with it. And if you don't comply with it specifically as a landlord, in this case the buyer, it's designed to punish the landlord if they don't meet the specific requirements of the statute. Okay? So, rental payments. How much is rent? Will be prorated. Occupancy rights. Who gets to stay? Will they be animals, smoking, utilities? Okay. In the dream world, the best solution for this is just to never enter into a pre and post agreement. It's the easiest way to mitigate your liability and to ensure that you don't get sued and not run through any of the scenarios you're talking about.
Is there any case of pre-possession?
Pre-possession?
Yeah, pre-possession.
Okay. So that becomes a so the question was repossession. So the lawyer answer is it really depends. If it's post-possession, if it's a lease agreement, you've got to evict. You've got to do 5-day notice, 30-day notice, 3-day notice. You have to comply with all of those obligations. There's not a scenario, if it's a lease agreement, where you can just kick the door down and say, out you go. Because NRS 118A is designed to prevent that, which is why if you have a pre-possession agreement, you probably may or may not want a lease agreement because you've got eviction rights. That's part of the reason. What do you do if the buyer doesn't leave and they can't qualify for their mortgage? It needs to be addressed in the document. You don't want a judge decide. Okay? So, should the parties insist on doing this, you really need to convince them, convey to them, they need to go speak to an attorney, they need to talk to their accounting people, there's tax consequences, all that kind of fun stuff. If you decide this is what you want to do, GeoVR has offered template forms. They're in your packet. They're templates in the sense that they are not designed to replace the conversation you have with your buyer and seller, and you encourage them to go speak to an attorney and encourage them to go talk to their accountants and those kinds of things. things, okay? Now, the forms are designed as a baseline, as a place to start this discussion, but as you can see from the questions we've asked here today, this is not something that you want to take lightly. You want to make sure that you're really going through and addressing this, okay?
Would you allow us to share this document that you wrote with any of our buyers or sellers?
I allow you it's going to be published in the SNR. So I'm assuming that all of your clients read that. You can certainly share it. The problem with the document you have before you that's a draft, I prefer you actually do that.
No, this one that you wrote.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, it's a
So
draft.
the problem becomes, is the reason why Mark's draft is, I'm not your lawyer, I'm not your client's lawyer, I'm not giving them legal advice. To the extent that they're gonna rely on anything that's said in there, I don't wanna get sued because I won't lie to you. So in that sense, I can't give them legal advice. So it's much better to explain those issues with your client and then tell them to go seek out an attorney that can answer those types of questions. Okay, are you on the pre or the post?
The post.
Okay.
So in 2B, it says the sum of X amount of dollars per month, and then it says for how long, essentially for how many months, and then it says that it's all going to be paid up front through escrow. But then down at the bottom, in 4, it says that either party shall have the right to terminate the tenancy upon 7 days written notice. So I don't know, it just sounds like the buyer can take the money and then what? They'll just say, well, yeah, I just took your money for 3 months and now I'm giving you 7 days written notice. That's just kind of confusing.
The idea with notice was to allow both parties to get out of this document in a relatively quickly period of time. So the problem becomes is if you have more than 30 days notice provision, the judge could look at this and determine it's a month-to-month tenancy, which creates additional problems. So the idea was to have a short period of time to end it. The simple answer is if I cancel any contract and I keep your money, you have one avenue to resolve that, and that's now the courthouse. So, sorry, there was another, I didn't got a line for mics. Yes, go for it.
Hi, I just wanted to address, someone was asking about the notes. The conclusion notes are actually in the form that we had.
Sorry?
We have the handout
Yeah,
with
you
these
have my,
notes right
you have
here.
my white paper, yeah.
Right. So someone was asking where, or can we have the notes, and I'm saying we have the notes.
It seems to me, and I am a broker, that if one of my agents came to me and said somebody needs to stay there for 3 months, I might tell them they need to either talk to a property manager, a licensed property manager, or to an attorney and do a lease. I think that I would suggest to my agents that if it's for 7 days or less, that they need to stay ahead of time or after, that perhaps this document might work just fine. But if it's for anything longer than a couple of days, it needs to be addressed by a professional.
Yes, I would completely agree with that. And the problem you have with post-possession is the longer they're there, the more you want to have it be an actual lease agreement. Like if I said, for example, the buyer agreed that they're going to let me stay for 10 years, you probably don't want to use this document. Well, actually, as an attorney who's got a kid who wants to go to college, use this document so my daughter can go to Harvard. Okay? All right. We've been going for an hour. I think we can wrap up before 2 if we keep going, so we're not going to take a break. So we'll just keep moving. If you need to take a break, feel free to do so. Okay, let's talk about the listing agreement. The listing agreement went live last week, September 1st. So the purposes of our communication today, we're going to be focusing just on the ER agreement. The sections that have changed are exactly the same in the EA agreement, but just for clarity's sake, we will be focusing today on the ER agreement. So some of the updates include revisions to the personal property section, addressing the CIC section, updates in advertising, opt-out disclosures, and a few other things. So, Section 3, property offered for sale, the personal property. So this section was updated to explain to the seller that when it comes to the sale of personal property, the listing agreement is not controlling. It is the residential purchase agreement, okay? And so the RPA is controlling it. So if the seller says, I want to sell these 17 things, and list them on the listing agreement, but only 15 of them get in the RPA, we're telling him the listing agreement that the broker's not responsible for that. the RPA is the place that you need to address it. We also included a section about leased or lien property, so they can identify them, for example, solar panel systems. Because the SRPD was recently updated to reflect disclosure of solar panels, okay? So you don't have the scenario down the road where you find out that the solar panels are leased and the buyer can no longer qualify for their mortgage because the seller failed to disclose it. It's now going to be disclosed at the very beginning because they have to include it in this SRPD. It's a question to identify those types of things, right? Okay, section 10, fair housing, updated to the most recent required fair housing disclosures. Section 19, advertising. This section was updated to explain what exactly the broker has control of. Because our MLS routinely gets telephone calls from buyers saying, the images of my house are on ABC website, take them down. So it's an explanation to the seller that once you agree to have photos taken of the property, they are uploaded into the internet. The seller, the broker, have no control over whoever on the internet takes that picture and how they use it. So it's an explanation that once that's on there, we don't have the ability, we are not the internet police, we can't go out to a random website and say take it down, okay? It was also explained that the buyers might come through the property and take pictures. And that the seller agrees that the seller's broker and the seller's agent don't really have the ability to stop that. It's an explanation. Now let's kind of take a step back and talk about best practices here. So in the state of Nevada, we are a one notice recording state for most recordings. Meaning if I'm a seller and I have a audio-visual recording surveillance system in my home, do I have any obligation under state law to tell potential buyers that I'm recording everything they do? No, none. Nevada statute says expectation of privacy. The buyer would have to have an expectation of privacy. I don't know how a buyer would ever have an expectation of privacy walking through someone else's house. Okay? So what does that mean if you're a buyer's agent? You need to be telling your buyers, we have to assume that we are being video and audio recorded. So if you don't like a part of the house, you think that we can negotiate down because we see water damage or those kinds of things, you better have that conversation outside the house. Okay? So, let's talk a little bit about what happens when buyers walk through. If a buyer walks through and starts taking pictures of the interior of my house, do they need anybody's permission? Yes! What right does a buyer have to take pictures of my interior of my house if I'm the seller? Okay, so best practices. If I'm a seller and I'm having an open house, I would probably recommend to my client that they let me say, if there's a surveillance system, that they're under surveillance. If I'm a buyer and I want to go ahead and take pictures and I'm doing a walkthrough, I should probably ask. Okay? Any questions about this? Now, this section 19, update the listing agreement, is mostly designed to protect you guys. So that if you get a seller or a buyer who is very concerned about privacy, they can't turn around and sue you. Yes, ma'am?
From what you just said, can you clarify? Because in section 19, it says basically that the buyers can take pictures and the seller doesn't have any right to.
No, what that section says is that, look, the buyer goes in and takes pictures. Me as the broker and my agents really don't have a lot of ways to stop them. Now, a seller might have legal rights to sue a buyer for taking pictures, but the key in this is explaining that the broker and the agent don't really have a way to stop the buyer from taking pictures if they're doing a walk.
But yet you're saying that the
They
buyer
need to get-
does need permission?
Yes, under, like, so you're comparing apples and oranges, okay? So the purpose of this provision is to explain to the seller that me, if I'm your listing broker, I don't have the ability to stop a buyer from taking pictures if they're walking through your house and putting them on the internet to protect you as the seller's
Okay,
broker.
so this is basically to protect the agent.
Maybe? Yeah, let me finish. Yeah. Does the seller have the ability to sue a buyer for taking those pictures? Probably. But the idea is to get the broker out of that crosswalk, okay? All right. Any questions about section 19? Section 20 is the opt-outs. Section 20 is a required provision. The seller opt-out provision is pursuant to a consent decree between the U.S. Department of Justice and the National Association of Realtors. For those of you who remember, in the early 2000s, the Department of Justice was trying to make the argument that MLS systems nationwide violated federal antitrust law, trying to break them up and take them outside of the realtors and the associations who own them. As a part of the consent decree, the settlement with the Department of Justice, so the Department of Justice would do this, we agreed to have opt-outs. So, the consent decree only applies to data received through an IDX. So, to answer your question, how does Zillow get that information?
Well, why is it not being blocked from Zillow, the seller opt-out?
So let me finish. So, what this does is, the opt-out language is for individual websites who receive data from the MLS and use that data from the MLS to do a calculation of value. Zillow's calculation of value system is not based on MLS data. It is based on other factors that is not a contingency or not related to the Department of Justice consent decree. So without going way too lawyerly, they're different. Okay? And Zillow is not a party to this consent decree, and they're under no obligation to do this, because Zillow didn't exist when it was lost. So, it's been streamlined to two things. We used to have four, now we only have two. And it is online commentary and automated estimates of value. Those are the only two that are required by the Department of Justice consent decree. The other two opt-outs, address and not displaying at all, are now referenced in lines 232 through 235 in section 30. And if a seller really doesn't want their property listed or the address listed, address it in the additional terms. Okay? Because the idea was to mirror this to just what's required by the Department of Justice. Now that being said, the consent decree expires next year, in 2018. What is going to happen at that point? We'll have to have this language. If the Department of Justice is going to decide to sue, I have no idea. But we'll have to probably revisit this next year, either way, with the end of the consent. All right, that is the end of the changes to the ER and the EA listing. Those went live on September 1st. Any questions about that before we run through some stuff with property management and try to get you out of here before 2 o'clock? The question is what happened to the fair housing page at the back of the document? I've been with GLBR since 2013, and that document has not been attached to any listing agreement since I've been employed. So I can't tell you why that was taken away, because it was done at least more than 5 years ago. So the obligation under fair housing as attached listing, you have an obligation to address that. There needs to be a single page. I honestly can't tell you the answer why it was taken off the listing agreement. I'm more than happy to do some research into that, but I don't have an answer because it's been gone for longer than I've been here. All right, let's talk property management. So the remainder of these forms are, the remainder of things we're going to talk about do not require a forms change per se, but they do impact your business and do go into effect on October 1st. So we thought we'd take a few minutes to talk about it. So, domestic violence and leases. As you know in Nevada, if you are a victim of domestic violence or harassment, sexual assault, stalking, those victims can terminate their lease early. Actually, you know what? Let's do this. If you're not a property manager, there's really not a whole lot after this that you really need to stick around for. So, if you let's take like a 2-minute break, pursuant to statute. It was not the intent of AB 161, because there's a clear difference that I become a party to the contract. It just says that I can execute the document. I don't anticipate that being, I anticipate that being an issue raised once, and a judge is is explained where they're at and going away. Okay? But we thought about that, which is why we went with that horrible sentence, landlord authorized NRS 645 owner property manager, because it's straight from the statute. Okay? All right, any questions about this? That's the bill, if you want to look it up. Believe it or not, we're almost done. So, if you've got specific legal questions, including the interpretations of contractual language,
Too fast.
I didn't think anybody would actually want to read it. There you go. Okay. Specific legal questions, including interpretation of contractual language, forms, should be referred to the Nevada Association of Realtors. That's their phone number up there. Tell Jim and Tiffany I said hi. For technical assistance and troubleshooting with transaction desk, call technical support. If you email me specific legal questions, I will eventually get back to you and say, I can't answer your question. If you call my phone number, you will listen to a ridiculously long voicemail where I tell you I am not your lawyer and can't answer your questions. And if I do call you back, it will be to tell you that I am not your lawyer and can't answer your questions. Okay. Now, forms changes to the RPA and related forms go live on October 1st. This video will be available on the association's website, along with other tools to help you get ready for October 1st. The listing agreement went live last week. There's a short video with the MLS chair, Charlotte McGee, that walks through overview changes that we did today as well, and those forms are available in transactions as we speak. The property management changes primarily go into effect on October 1st, but don't require form changes. Okay? All right. Thanks for your time.